in the service and what era that was, what war you served in.
Okay.
And we'll begin there.
Well, I joined the United States Navy, and I served from 68 to about 72. I went through boot camp in San Diego, was assigned to the USS Benjamin Stoddard DDG-22 out of Pearl Harbor. We did plane guarding, and we plane guarded the Enterprise. We actually were on line, the gun line in Vietnam a couple different times. And we spent some time in North Korea, South Korea waters when a Navy plane had been shot down. I did my year on board ship and then went to Port Hueneme, was assigned to the training center there, and spent about 4 months going through heavy equipment mechanic school there in Port Hueneme, California, and then went on to Coronado Island for what they called SEER School, Escape and Evasion, and then was assigned to NSA Da Nang in Vietnam, and spent time in Da Nang in what they called the heavy shop, and we did all the heavy equipment, cranes, forklifts, and whatever heavy equipment was in the Da Nang area that we maintained.
What years was that?
That was in, well, I was on the ship in 68, 69, and I was in Da Nang 69 through 70, was the tour. I was at NSA Da Nang working on the night crew and generator and equipment repair, service and equipment. I was actually hurt while I was over there, run over by a forklift, and then medevac out, spent time in Guam, and spent time in San Diego at the Naval Hospital until I recuperated from my injuries. Then I went back to Port Hueneme, and I was assigned to Mobile Construction Battalion 10, known as MCB 10, until I was discharged. I went from 10, we went on to Spain, and we were stationed in Rota, Spain, and from there I was discharged from the Navy.
Which year
which was in right around end of 71, 72.
Okay.
I believe, yeah.
And I don't recall if you said you were drafted or did you?
No, I joined. I volunteered in the Navy for many reasons. I wanted to go in. My dad had served, and my uncles had served, and I'd heard about the Seabees, and I was working in construction. And so I figured if I volunteered, I'd have a better chance to get what I wanted, and I did. And I learned a trade from there, which I actually came out and was doing mechanic work when I first got out because of the trade I learned. Had I not got hurt, I probably would have stayed in because I did go in with the intentions of making it a career. And it was a good life. I did enjoy it, but I got hurt and I couldn't continue to do the same kind of work. So.
What do you have for memories from basic training?
Oh, boot camp. Boot camp was something else. I was in pretty good shape for boot camp, so physically wise, I did okay. I think it was the adjusting to a new lifestyle. Luckily, my parents were a little on the rigid side, so discipline meant a lot, so that wasn't too bad. I think the funny parts were the hurry up and wait, get things done right away. Everything was on a time clock, so I think what was funny about that was those individuals that didn't have the discipline when they were young learned it real quick, which in boot camp, they learned it, but we were taught it because they learned it. Everybody got treated the same. Somebody mess up, we all mess up. And so it was learning to be a team and learning to be a unit is which was good. It was good. So.
In your time when you were assigned to ships, obviously that's altogether a different environment than when you were in Da Nang later, but can you explain a little bit about the life aboard a ship and what that was like when you were at that age? And
Yeah, a different lifestyle. Nice in a sense that as young as I was able to see many different countries on the ship where when I was in the battalion, we didn't go to as many places. Long hours, you worked your 8-hour day plus you stood watch. If you were 12 to 4, you stood the 12 to 4 at night, 12 to 4 in the afternoon. And they used to call it dog the watch, where they'd back it up after so many days. One of the watches was 2 hours and you moved the watch back so that you weren't always on the midnight or the 4 to 6 or whatever. And you did a variety of work. I mean, you weren't assigned to one task. You were assigned multiple tasks depending on the time of the day, depending if you were at general quarters or semi-general quarters, if you were standing whatever kind of watch you were assigned to. So the nice thing about it was you learned a lot of different things. The biggest surprise to me was when I got on board to see that probably 90% of the crew was about my age, which was under 25. And even some of the officers, what a destroyer costs, I have no idea. But when you're thinking about a ship that's carrying nuclear warheads, and the majority of the people are under the age of 25, and yes, there was a few what we called lifers, the ones that stayed in, but there was very few of them. And it was surprising to know the discipline that was there for what we were doing and the time we spent. Cramped quarters, actually good food. You didn't always have what we called fresh showers. A lot of time it was saltwater showers because something happened and the converter that converted ocean water into fresh water didn't work. But a shower is better one way than no shower at all. It's not like going on a cruise for a cruise ship, that's for sure. We ate in shifts. I remember sitting at the chow hall. They were about picnic table size, and I believe there was 4 tables in there, aluminum bolted down in the ground, aluminum plate tray. It's not a plate, it's a tray. And sometimes you had to hold on to your tray because if it didn't, it slid off the other end of the table, depending on the weather conditions. Sleeping in the area I slept in up the front of the ship, it was 5 tiers high, and you couldn't sleep on your side. You had to sleep on your back because the rack was right above you, and there was just enough room for each individual. There was no sitting area or anything. So it was not like some of these cruise ships that I've seen, But, everybody got along. Everybody did what they had to do. It was training. If we weren't working, we were training, and while we were working, we did training because you never knew what time they would call general quarters so that we'd train. So the day that we needed to do it, it was an instinct. You did it without thinking about it. In the middle of the night, they'd call general quarters for training, and you think it's the real thing, and then next thing you know, you're just training. But so it was a different life. One day you're a lookout, the next day you're steering the ship, the next day you're bringing on supplies. It's amazing to see how a naval ship can stay out at sea and get refueled and new supplies for the food and whatever, the ammo can be transported from one ship to the next, how they can transport people from one ship to the next. It's not as sophisticated as people think it is. You just don't walk across, and they have what they call a bosun's chair, and they sling them across, and 2 ships and so on. But it was interesting life. A destroyer is not a big ship, but it's not small. It wasn't one of the smaller ones. There was, when we were fully staffed, when the whole crew was on, we were actually a flagship. So the Admiral had his crew. We had 325 individuals on board. And so there's procedures you have to follow so that people can traverse the ship 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The ship is in the waters and moving.
What did you do for fun or entertainment, or wasn't there any?
Every so often, yeah. Every Sunday we used to barbecue on what we call the flight deck. fantail at the back of the ship, and they would actually barbecue steak and whatever. We'd do some fishing. Sometimes we would go dead in the water, and it's swim time. After I had a couple of times, I got to be on duty during swim time because I was a rifleman. And they said, I'm looking at the rifle they hand me, and it's real ammo, and they said, that's for the sharks. So from then on, I said, I think I'll volunteer to be a rifleman. Forget the swimming, because if you got people up here looking for sharks so the guys can swim, I don't know that this is a good place to be swimming. We never did see any sharks while we were swimming. Yeah, you do see them when you're going across the ocean and so on.
How do you stay in touch with your family back home?
You actually, mail would come, usually whenever you took on some kind of supply, the mail bag would come, they would transfer it over. The letters, they may be 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old, but that's how you got to communicate. The longest we ever stayed out in one stretch without going to land was 21 days. The longest I remember not seeing land was about 14 days. And you'd get up in the morning, you'd walk around, you'd say, gotta be land someplace. Can't we at least go see it, And it can get tiring, especially when you watch the same movie day in and day out, We always had movies, and they always played at least one movie. If it was raining, it was indoor. If it wasn't, we actually turned the gun mount around, and they used the gun mount for the screen. The Green Beret was a big movie, and you could never trade it. And once you got it, you got stuck with it for weeks because nobody else wanted it. So that was, but overall, it was a good experience.
If you had to compare that with your time in Da Nang or in country in Vietnam, how was it different from experience?
I think the difference was when we were in Vietnam up and down the coast. We were a little safer. We got fired upon in that, but it was safer than being in Da Nang. The thing about being in Da Nang, number one, you're on ground. Number two, there was a change in most of the scenery on the ship. There's not a lot of change. In Da Nang, I did a lot more heavy equipment repair. Worked one day on an asphalt repair, an asphalt spreader, or a backhoe, or up at the quarry, wherever they needed someone to repair engines or the device itself, generators at the bases in the hospital. So you did a variety of things, and you increased your knowledge of the work you did. Yeah.
Do you recall your homecoming to the United States when you finished? Was it? I'm not quite sure how it would have worked in the Navy.
Well, it was the first time I came back. People greeted you. There was no big ticker tape parade, but because everybody during Vietnam came back differently at different times, and it just wasn't at the end. The second time I came back, I was medevac back, so it wasn't. It was a different atmosphere. I always talk about it and I joke about it. I was in the Navy hospital, and it was just a big ward. You could see from one end to the other. I go to be transported by the Air Force, and I land at Travis Air Force Base, and I'm in a room with two other guys, like a regular hospital, and they walk in and say, what kind of beer would you like? And I'm, well, give me a Coors, and they, well, you want a six-pack or what? In the Navy, they never asked us that, so it was a different, from the Air Force to the Navy, what a difference in lifestyle. And the hospital. I was at the Naval Hospital in Long Beach. At that time, it was actually on the base. It was off the 605 freeway in the Los Angeles area. A beautiful hospital, actually looked like a civilian hospital. And that one had like 4 people to a room. It wasn't the typical Navy, big old barracks, everything's open, no privacy, there's, So coming home from that was a little different. By that time, the public perception of Vietnam had really changed. So when I first came home the first time, you wore your uniform on the weekends and off, When I came back the next time, they advised us to go off base in civilian clothes. And so, the perception of what was going on had changed with time here in the United States and even within the military, it had changed. But overall, it was a good experience. I got a trade out of it. I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs now. I've got a good job. Because of that trade that I learned, I moved into a position in the VA. So overall, it's benefited, and the VA has really been beneficial for me. I've gone from an automotive mechanic at a national cemetery in Los Angeles to the acting undersecretary for our department in memorial affairs. So I have to thank the Navy to give me my start. You know, the discipline, not only my parents, but the Navy, you know, you learn a little bit different discipline.
Sure. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your interview?
I'd like to thank everyone that served, from the Civil War to Iraq and Afghanistan, anyone that has served our nation in uniform, whether they were active duty or reserves, whether they were called to active duty. I want to thank them, and their parents and their loved ones that miss them while they're gone, and those that gave their life that we take care of now for the service, because we are who we are, the United States, because of veterans and because of those that serve on active duty.
Okay, and on a personal note, I'd like to thank you for your service.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.